When she faced her husband and his mistress in court, the room fell silent as she calmly requested a surprise witness. All eyes turned to the door, then her husband's face turned ashen. He never thought they would show up. It had only been a few hours since Evelina's world shattered. The husband she had adored and trusted implicitly, the man she had built her life around, had a mistress. The revelation hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless and disoriented. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the complete undoing of the life they had carefully constructed together. Everything she believed in, everything she had nurtured with love and dedication, crumbled like a fragile sandcastle swept away by an unexpected surge. Evelina happened to be driving past Graham's workplace when she saw him standing outside the building. She wanted to stop and say hello, but another woman beat her to it, a brunette with long, shiny, well-groomed hair and high heels. She confidently walked up to Graham and kissed him on the lips. Graham seemed happy with the kiss. He gently embraced the woman, and they got into his car together and drove off to an unknown destination. Evelina was left sitting in her car, her mouth agape, unable to move. Thoughts swirled in her head. She, too, was beautiful and well-groomed. Who was this woman? How long had they been together? And why hadn't she noticed anything earlier? But all of this she would have to figure out later. Right now, Evelina needed to pick up their daughter from school. Evelina brought their daughter to school every day and picked her up after classes. They had 2 children together, and she took care of them entirely on her own. Graham earned well and spared no expense on the family, while Evelina worked from home as a translator of French and German. Her work hours were part-time, mainly because their younger son was only 4 and still attended daycare. The family lived in the suburbs. While Evelina's daily routine revolved around the children, her husband was apparently spending his time with another woman. It hurt deeply, but there was nothing she could do about it at that moment. She wasn't about to cause a scene in the middle of the city. It wasn't her style, nor would it accomplish anything. Instead, she decided she would confront her husband that evening. Graham came home from work around 9 p.m. At that moment, Evelina was putting their son to bed, and their daughter was in her room reading a book. Evelina had introduced her daughter, Ivy, to the Harry Potter series at a young age, and since then, the girl had been an avid fan. After her son fell asleep, Evelina went downstairs to the kitchen, where Graham was having dinner. "Hi, love," Graham greeted her, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Evelina turned away, ignoring the gesture. "What's wrong?" Graham asked, surprised. "Why are you ignoring me?" "Graham, is there something you'd like to tell me?" Evelina asked directly. "Like what?" He looked confused. "Today, purely by chance, I drove past your office. I saw you outside, and I saw a brunette approach you. She kissed you, and you hugged her like she was your wife. Be honest, Graham, do you have a mistress? Who is this woman?" Graham listened to his wife's monologue in silence. Finally, he said, "Evelina, I don't want to talk about this now." "Oh, so you don't want to talk, but you don't mind cheating on me?" Evelina pressed, feeling betrayed. Graham sighed deeply. "Yes, I have a mistress. She's my colleague. But Evelina, I don't want to change anything. You and the kids mean everything to me. She's just..." "Just what?" Evelina was outraged. "Are you seriously suggesting we continue living like nothing happened? Do you think I'll forgive you?" Graham became visibly nervous. He hadn't expected this reaction from Evelina, nor had he imagined the truth would ever come out. "Listen, Evelina," he said harshly, "I'm not giving you a divorce. The kids need to grow up in a complete family." "You're a coward, Graham. You traded us for some woman from work," Evelina said with tears in her eyes as she left the kitchen. That night, husband and wife slept in separate rooms. Graham didn't come to Evelina, and the next morning he left the house early, before anyone else was awake. Unlike his usual habit of leaving a note or waking her up, this time there was nothing. Evelina realized her family was on the brink of collapse. She didn't know what to do or how to act, so she distracted herself with household chores and caring for the children. By lunchtime, she had taken their son to daycare, picked up their daughter from school, and completed all her translation work. Alone with her thoughts, her memory drifted back to 8 years ago when she and Graham first met. They had met at university. Evelina was studying foreign languages and Graham was finishing his degree in computational technologies. Despite having completely different interests, they crossed paths during a university event. Sparks flew immediately, turning into friendship and then a relationship. Their courtship was brief. Evelina got pregnant and Graham proposed. Evelina finished university with Ivy in her arms, thanks to the support of her parents and Graham's mother. Graham, already established with a job, had a car and an apartment. They sold the apartment after a couple of years, added some savings, and bought a large house. After Ivy was born, Evelina worked briefly at a translation bureau before her second pregnancy forced her to leave the job. Since then, she worked part-time from home, raising and educating their children, while Graham climbed the corporate ladder to become a department head at a major IT company. She supported him in everything, never interfering with his work and always accommodating his needs. And now, she had 2 young children, a part-time job, and a husband who had betrayed her. Determined, Evelina decided it was time to act. This evening, she wanted to have another conversation with her husband to understand how he envisioned their future together. The conversation took place, but it didn't go in Evelina's favor. "I'm telling you again, I don't want a divorce, but I can't leave Clara yet," her husband told her. "What do you mean, can't?" Evelina asked, confused. "She's pregnant," he said guiltily. This was a twist Evelina hadn't expected, but she couldn't tolerate her husband's infidelity, let alone his pregnant mistress. "I'm filing for divorce, and that's final. Our life together is no longer possible," she declared, on the verge of tears. "Well, maybe you're right, Evelina," her husband admitted. "But keep in mind, if you file for divorce, you won't get much from me. I don't want a divorce. It will damage my reputation." But Evelina was resolute. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow," she repeated. "Even if you're against it, I won't live with you knowing you have a mistress." "Think it over, Evelina," he warned. "I'll leave you with nothing and I'll take the kids." This threat only fueled her anger. "Just try to take my kids away," she shouted and once again in tears ran to her bedroom. True to her word, Evelina filed for divorce the very next day. Because they had children, the process would require a court's decision, and they were given a month to reconcile. But no reconciliation happened. Graham, though still coming home to sleep, barely spoke to Evelina. One day, he came home not alone but with Clara. Evelina, noticing her slightly rounded belly, realized the pregnancy was real. Coming down from the second floor, she found her husband and Clara sitting in her kitchen, drinking tea and chatting cheerfully. They were eating the very pancakes she had made for her children that morning. "What is this?" she demanded. "Have you completely lost your mind? Who is this woman, and why did you bring her into our home?" "Soon I'll be living here instead of you," Clara replied lazily, taking another bite of her pancake. "And who told you that?" Evelina shot back. "This is the home of my husband, me and my children." "Well, your husband will soon be my husband," Clara retorted, "and you'll be nobody to him. We'll take your children too, and we'll have a big, happy family." Evelina turned to Graham, who had stayed silent throughout the argument. "Tell me this isn't true," she pleaded. "Evelina, I asked you not to file for divorce. I begged you," he said. "You didn't listen, so now I'm divorcing you, and I'm taking the house and the kids." "What? You can't do that?" Evelina protested. "The kids are attached to me. I've been the one raising them." "But you don't have the money to support them properly," Graham scoffed. "How much do you even make as a translator? 30,000 annually? That won't even cover rent for a decent apartment, let alone clothes or activities for the kids." Evelina was hurt and angry. "How dare you say that? We loved each other. I loved you. I loved our children, our home, and you ruined it all." I won't let you take my kids and I'll fight for our home, she declared. She couldn't bear to look at Clara, whose smug face and pregnant belly seemed to taunt her. Graham and Clara stayed in the kitchen for another half-hour before leaving the house. Evelina couldn't understand why her husband had brought his mistress to their home, knowing she was there. Their daughter, noticing the tension between her parents, began asking questions. Mum, why doesn't Dad come home sometimes? Where does he sleep? Her second-grade daughter asked. Evelina struggled to find the right words to explain the situation without traumatizing her children. Sweetheart, she said gently, your dad and I are going through a tough time right now. Very soon he will be living separately from us, but you'll still be able to see him and spend time together. It's just the way things are going to be for now. Her daughter, being young, didn't fully understand and couldn't believe that her father would soon live somewhere else. The day of the court hearing arrived. Evelina and Graham were supposed to finalize their divorce. Graham showed up with Clara. This was not the peaceful resolution Evelina had hoped for. She thought they would divorce amicably, with the children staying with her and Graham moving out. But he filed a counterclaim, requesting custody of the children and a division of property. They were officially divorced that day, but for Evelina, a nightmare had just begun. 3 days later, Graham returned, not alone, but with Clara. We're here, Evelina. After all, this is my house too, isn't it? Her ex-husband declared. Evelina stared at him, her eyes glassy with disbelief. How could someone she once adored show such audacity? He had brought his mistress into the home where she lived with their children. Graham, are you out of your mind? She demanded. Your children still live here. What are you going to tell them about this woman? If you don't like it, move out, Graham replied coldly. The kids will just have to get used to it. She'll be living here too. Graham deliberately hugged his mistress in front of Evelina and kissed her on the forehead. Soon, there will be a court hearing where I'll take the house and the kids away from you, he said confidently. You won't succeed, Graham. I'll fight with everything I have, but I won't let you take the children, Evelina replied firmly, realizing that continuing the conversation was pointless. She left the room, while Graham and Clara occupied the guest room since Evelina was still staying in the master bedroom. Evelina wasn't prepared for such a turn of events. Back in her bedroom, she thought about her next steps. Staying in the same house as Graham and his mistress was impossible. She went to her children's rooms and told them to pack their things quickly. We're leaving the house, she told them. Mommy, where are we going? Why do we have to leave our home? Ivy asked, overwhelmed by questions. Ivy, I'll explain later. Right now, we need to leave, Evelina said as she hurriedly packed the children's clothes, important documents, and her work laptop. Quietly, without Graham or Clara noticing, she led the kids to the garage, got into her car, and drove off. Mom, where are we going? Her son Miles asked. I don't know yet, sweetheart, Evelina admitted, trying to keep her composure. How can you not know, Mom? Ivy asked, confused. Son, Evelina knew she needed to gather her thoughts and come up with a plan. Staying with her in-laws wasn't an option. They would side with Graham and support his efforts to take the children. Her own mother lived in a different state. She didn't have friends she could impose upon with 2 kids in tow. Thankfully, Evelina had some money saved, along with funds Graham regularly deposited into her account for family expenses. She decided to find a rental apartment. Pulling over to the side of the road, she browsed listings online. Evelina quickly found a suitable 2-bedroom apartment close to Ivy's school. She called the landlord. Hello, good evening. I'd like to rent your apartment. Yes, immediately, she said. Immediately? The man asked, surprised. Yes, it's for me and my 2 children. We need it urgently, she explained. All right, I'll meet you there in 40 minutes, he replied. Evelina drove to the address. While waiting, she and the kids looked around the area. It had all the essentials, stores, a pharmacy, and a cafe. But the children were uneasy about moving to a strange new apartment and leaving their home behind. Ivy started asking questions again. Mum, how long are we going to live here? She asked. I'm not sure, sweetheart. Maybe a couple of months, and if we like it, we might stay longer, Evelina replied. "And who's going to live in our house?" Ivy continued. "Well, for now, Dad is staying there with someone else. That's why we can't go back yet," Evelina explained. "Dad traded us for someone else? He left us?" Ivy asked, hurt. "No, darling. Your dad loves you. It's just that sometimes moms and dads decide to live apart. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you," Evelina reassured her, trying to protect her children from resentment toward their father. Soon the landlord arrived. He was a tall, respectable-looking man in his 40s. "Hello, are you Evelina?" he asked. "Yes, that's me," she replied, holding her children's hands. "Let's take a look at the apartment," he said, leading them inside. The apartment was bright and cozy, with fresh renovations and tasteful furniture. Evelina liked it immediately. "We'll take it," she said quickly. "We'll rent it long-term." The landlord handed her the keys and wished her all the best. "If you have any questions, feel free to call me," he said before leaving. "Well, kids, this will be our home for now? Pick your rooms," Evelina told them. The children chose the larger room, leaving the smaller one for Evelina. The next morning, as usual, Evelina dropped Ivy off at school and took Miles to daycare. But her life had changed. Everything was more stressful now. She increased her workload to save money and hired a lawyer to help her file a countersuit for property division and custody. Her best friend, Celia, helped her find a good lawyer. Evelina called the lawyer Roland and arranged a meeting at a cafe with a play area since she had no one to watch the kids. They started talking. "I never thought this would happen to me. It feels like something out of a movie," Evelina said, holding back tears. "Tell me more about your situation so I can understand how to help you," Roland said, taking notes in his notebook. Evelina explained everything, discovering her husband's affair, Graham's threats to take the kids, her decision to file for divorce, and Graham bringing his mistress to their home. She also described her current living situation and her fears about losing her children. Roland listened attentively. "Taking children away from a mother who works and takes care of them is very difficult," he reassured her. "As for property division, that will take more work, but we'll figure it out." Evelina felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Roland, for helping me and for renting me the apartment," she said. "This is just the beginning, Evelina." "Let's stay in touch and work through everything together," he replied. Meanwhile, back at the house, Clara continued to pressure Graham. She insisted they move into the house despite Graham's initial reluctance, arguing that she didn't want to raise their baby in her small apartment. Graham eventually gave in to her demands, but his real motivation for fighting for custody wasn't love. It was anger and spite toward Evelina for filing for divorce. Graham wanted everything to stay the same, to live with Evelina and their children while financially supporting Clara and her child. However, Clara had her sights set on more than that. She wanted the house for herself. And he didn't mind. It didn't matter to him at all where Evelina would live after being left on her own. Confident in his good lawyer, he prepared for the children to live with him. The thought that Evelina might win custody never crossed his mind. After all, she didn't have the money or the connections he had built over years of work. But everything turned out very differently. Roland approached the case very seriously. He thoroughly researched Alexander's background. In his circles, Graham was known as a cunning, bold, and highly resourceful person. Roland had a good acquaintance in the IT company where Graham worked, someone who held a managerial position in a neighbouring department. Roland arranged a meeting with this acquaintance, Hugh, who agreed to meet him. "Hugh, thank you for meeting with me," Roland began. "I'm handling a case for a young woman whose husband wants to take her children. He's started an affair at work and is now fighting for custody. He works in your company. Do you know Graham Whittaker?" "I do," Hugh replied. "That guy. Ever since he got involved with that Clara, he's changed for the worse." "So, you know Clara too?" Roland asked. "Of course, who doesn't? She works in HR. Quite the character, always looking for her next target. Now she's with Whittaker. I've heard rumours that she had connections with the CEO himself, but that's unverified. She's certainly attractive on the outside, but inside. A real piece of work, Hugh commented. Recently I've heard Alexander's relationship with the CEO has soured significantly, though I don't know why. Maybe it's because of Clara. No, I doubt that. The CEO has a wife, and when she found out about his affair, she caused such a scandal that people are still gossiping about it, Hugh explained. Our CEO might look serious, but he's completely under his wife's thumb. So, the Clara story is definitely over. After a pause, Hugh added, Again, just rumours, but Graham has been leaking company data to a competitor. However, no one has been able to prove it. This information was crucial for Roland. He understood that unravelling this story would be a significant challenge, but he was determined not to let his client down. He had a reputation for working honestly. 2 weeks later, the first hearing to determine the children's living arrangements was scheduled. Roland was confident about this issue. He had gathered all the necessary documents and was prepared to prove in court that his client was a good mother. He had personally observed Evelina's care for Ivy and Miles during their first meeting at a cafe, noticing her genuine affection and dedication to her children. The 2 weeks flew by, and the day of the court hearing arrived. Evelina was very nervous, knowing that her life could change drastically that day. Surprisingly, the session went smoothly. Graham appeared without Clara and didn't cause a scene. Evelina, who knew her ex-husband well, could see from his appearance and behaviour that he was facing difficulties. However, she didn't rush to comfort him. After all, it wasn't her who had started this ridiculous game that turned her and her children's lives upside down. The court ruled in favour of the children staying with their mother. Evelina was overjoyed. She could now take Ivy to school in peace, knowing her daughter would be with her in the evening as well. Graham was allowed to visit the children whenever he wanted, but only by prior arrangement, which seemed to suit him fine. After all, with the major problems at work, he had other things to worry about. Graham had been working at the company for a long time and realised he needed either a promotion or at least a salary increase. When that didn't happen, he began looking into the competitor that had quickly grown into a formidable modern firm. This irritated his company's CEO, who demanded his employees outperform the competition. Frustrated by the lack of a raise, Graham approached the competitors and offered to sell them sensitive company information. Although initially skeptical, they eventually agreed, paying him a substantial sum. However, when the CEO discovered the leak, he couldn't determine who the traitor was, as everyone remained silent. Only Graham knew the truth. While the rival company thrived with the stolen information, Graham waited for them to offer him a job. But the competitor's leadership adhered to the principle that someone who betrays once will betray again. They never hired him. Work became increasingly unbearable for Graham as he failed to get the recognition he craved. At home, things were no better. A pregnant Clara constantly complained about money, space in the house, and needing a housekeeper. Her nagging only added to his irritation. After the court's favourable ruling, Evelina felt relieved. She now had the stability to care for her children without interference, while Alexander's life began to unravel further. Roland invited Evelina to celebrate the case at a cafe. She agreed, and the man took her to a small, cosy restaurant on the embankment. Evelina chose the most delicious items on the menu, deciding that today she deserved to treat herself. She had earned it after so many sleepless nights and frayed nerves. Everything had been worth it in the end. Evelina noticed that Roland wasn't wearing a wedding ring, but didn't directly ask about his marital status. He shared the details on his own. Evelina, looking at you reminds me of my wife. Well, my ex-wife, the lawyer corrected himself. So you're divorced too, like me? Evelina asked. Yes, I hope your divorce was more civilized than mine, he replied. As a lawyer, you probably know how to settle conflicts peacefully. Well, it wasn't exactly peaceful, Roland admitted. My ex-wife and I lived like roommates for a long time. We didn't communicate much at home, neither of us wanted to. This went on for years until one evening she told me she wanted a divorce. She had met someone else. attentive, caring, and she was happy with him. She said she wanted to live with him and wanted a divorce to make everything official. She told me, "I could have lied to you, spent days with him and nights with you, but I can't live like that." I didn't take it well. My pride was wounded. I refused to give her a divorce and said our only son would live with me. Those words hurt her deeply, though I only realize that now. Looking at you, I understand that children should stay with their mother and men shouldn't let their egos get in the way. "And how did it all turn out?" Evelina asked, curious about Roland's story. "My ex-wife married the man she met while we were still together. Our son stayed with her. I had to do a lot of self-reflection. The court ruled in her favor. I argued that my son should live with me, but the judge didn't agree. The apartment you live in with your children now was ours. I look back at that time and realize how happy we were there. That's where our son was born. Later, we saved up to buy a bigger apartment, but we didn't sell this one. I thought my son would live in it someday, but he moved to another city for university, so I rent it out now. Looking back, I've learned that happiness isn't in square meters. It's in the people who are close to you," Roland added. "Let's toast to that," Evelina said. They decided to order a bottle of wine to celebrate the case they had won. "To your happiness, Evelina, and to your children," Roland said, raising his glass. They sipped their wine and didn't stay long, as Evelina had to pick up her son from daycare. On her way home, Evelina couldn't stop thinking about Roland's comment regarding her ex-husband. He had hinted that Graham might be in serious trouble at work. The thought of him ending up in jail worried her, but she didn't let it show in front of Roland. She wondered what her ex-husband could have done for things to escalate so far, but there was no one she could ask. Roland, meanwhile, discovered a temporary position at a competing company through an online job posting. He applied, and the next day he was invited for an interview. Although the interview was challenging, Roland managed to impress the company's leadership. He was later offered the position of an external consultant, which suited him well, as it allowed him to continue his private practice. During his work at the company, Roland became friends with Helena, the secretary to the CEO. Helena was a bright young woman who had recently graduated from university. She had been working part-time at the company since her third year in college, so she was familiar with its inner workings. One day, Roland decided to leverage his friendship with her. "Helena, do you know all the employees here?" he asked casually. "Pretty much. There are only 2 big IT companies in our city, and the other one is going downhill, though," she replied. "Why do you think so?" Roland asked. "Employees are leaving it in droves and sharing their secrets with us," she said. Roland was stunned. "What did you just say?" he asked, barely believing his ears. Realizing her slip, Helena quickly added, "Please, Mr. Carrington, don't tell anyone I said that. The CEO would fire me if he knew." "What exactly shouldn't I say?" Roland pressed. "That Graham Whittaker, the head of a department at our competitor, leaked information about his company to us for a lot of money. It all happened at night. I was called in to document everything." This revelation confirmed Roland's suspicions. Armed with this information, Roland arranged a meeting with Alexander. Although Graham was reluctant at first, he eventually agreed to the meeting. "All these issues are being handled by my lawyer. I've laid out all the problem areas for him," Graham said sternly when they met. "Alexander, I wanted to discuss something with you personally. Something no one else should know about," Roland hinted. "What exactly are you talking about?" Graham asked, puzzled. "I'm not trying to blackmail you, but if you don't agree to my client's terms regarding the property division, you might lose your position at your company," Roland said carefully. Alexander's face darkened. "That's blackmail," he snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "I'll destroy you," he shouted and stormed out. Roland remained seated, processing the heated exchange and planning his next steps. One thing was certain. Graham would never agree to Roland's terms, so Roland had to act alone. His only hope was Helena. The court hearing to divide the shared property of Graham and Evelina was approaching, and Roland was diligently preparing. Evelina, too, was getting ready. 2 days before the hearing, Roland had a conversation with Evelina. "Evelina, you must be prepared for anything," he warned her. "What do you mean by anything? Do I not have a chance at the house?" she asked nervously. "No, you have a very good chance at the house, or at least half of it. But during the hearing, certain issues may come to light." "What issues?" Evelina asked, alarmed. "Regarding Alexander's work," Roland replied. It took great effort for Roland to convince Helena to appear in court. He also sent a notice to Graham Whittaker's direct superior, inviting him to the hearing. The CEO needed to know what had been happening in his company, and Roland planned to reveal everything in court. "As long as it doesn't affect my children," Evelina responded firmly. She had already decided that she wouldn't live with Graham again and that his life was his own. He had chosen his path, and now she needed to build her own future. "I understand, Evelina. We'll meet at the hearing," Roland said quietly. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to me and my children," she said, her gratitude evident. The 2 days flew by, and the day of the hearing arrived. Evelina went to court alone, leaving her children at home. They didn't need to witness the conflict between her and Graham. Her ex-husband didn't even greet her at court but showed up with his mistress, Clara, as expected. Evelina wasn't surprised. During the hearing, Evelina sat beside Roland as the judge entered and began reviewing the case. Among the shared assets, there was a 180-square-meter country house and 2 cars, one used by Graham and the other by Evelina. Graham wanted all the property to be transferred to him, arguing that he had paid for everything. "And what was your wife, Mrs. Kerr, doing all these years?" the judge asked Alexander. "She was taking care of the children, staying at home," Graham replied. "So Evelina Kerr didn't work but took care of the children. That means she contributed to the family's well-being. After all, children are part of the family, and someone needs to take care of them. In most families, roles are divided this way. As children grow, mothers return to work," the judge commented. "But she didn't help financially or purchase any of the assets," Graham protested. "I see. Thank you, Alexander. Please take your seat," the judge instructed. Graham sat down, and the judge turned to Evelina. "What are you claiming from the shared property?" "I believe I have the right to half of the house and the car I've been using. I think everything should be divided equally, especially since the children are staying with me and we need a place to live." "I'm not asking for more," Evelina answered. "I've heard you, Evelina," the judge said. At that moment, Evelina requested to bring in an important witness. "Does this relate to our case?" the judge asked. "Yes," Evelina said quietly, although in truth, her goal was to deal a final blow to her ex-husband. "Very well. Let the witness enter," the judge permitted. When Graham saw who entered the courtroom, his jaw dropped in shock. It was Helena, the secretary. She walked in nervously but gained confidence when Roland nodded at her reassuringly. Taking her seat, Helena began, "Your Honor, I want to testify that Graham Whittaker is an unscrupulous person," she started. "What do you mean by unscrupulous? Please clarify," the judge asked. "He betrayed his current employer," Helena stated. Graham tensed and glanced at his CEO, who was seated in the courtroom. Only now did Graham begin to piece together why his boss was present. Helena continued, "He leaked all the company's projects and strategies to a competitor." "What?" the CEO exclaimed. "Whittaker, so it was you! You're the rat on our ship!" "Quiet in the courtroom," the judge ordered, banging the gavel. "Let the witness finish." Helena went on, "He offered valuable company information to my boss in exchange for money. This deal happened late at night. I was called in specifically to document everything." "You idiot! What are you saying? That never happened," Graham shouted. "Quiet!" the judge reprimanded. "Security! Remove Graham Whittaker from the courtroom." 2 security officers approached Alexander, grabbed him by the arms and escorted him out. He continued shouting obscenities at Helena on his way out. "You're fired, Whittaker!" his boss yelled after him. The judge turned back to Helena. "Can you confirm your statements?" "Yes, Your Honor. I witnessed everything firsthand," Helena replied confidently. The judge then asked the CEO, "Can you corroborate this?" "Yes. There was indeed a data breach in our company about a month ago. We couldn't identify the culprit at the time, but as the department head, Whitaker had access to all this information. I don't deny it could have been him, the CEO admitted. Thank you. Please take your seat, the judge said. Turning to Evelina, the judge asked, Do you have any further statements or requests? No, Your Honor, Evelina replied. In that case, the court will recess to deliberate on the verdict, the judge declared, rising and leaving the courtroom. After the court hearing, Evelina and Roland stayed in the courtroom. Roland approached Helena to thank her again. Helena, you did great, he said, sincerely grateful. Soon after, the CEO of the rival company also spoke with Helena, and she shared everything she knew about the situation. About half an hour later, the judge returned to announce the verdict. The court ruled that all jointly acquired property during the marriage would be divided equally. Mr. Whitaker, by law, you are entitled to half of the country house, as well as the car you've been using, the judge declared. Evelina was overjoyed with the outcome, but the thought of dividing the house with her ex-husband made her uneasy. It would require further communication and compromise with Alexander, which she dreaded. Nonetheless, the court's decision aligned exactly with what she and Roland had hoped for. Not an enviable position for him, Roland remarked as they left the courthouse. He didn't get what he wanted, and now his boss is going to fire him. It'll be tough for him to find a job in his field, especially with all his ambitions. I never imagined things with Graham would get this bad, Evelina said, and I still have to raise my kids on my own. But I'll manage somehow. Maybe soon I'll find a full-time job. Exactly. Everything we planned has been accomplished, Roland said. Thank you again, Roland. I don't know what I'd have done without you, Evelina said warmly. Just doing my job, he replied. They parted ways and Evelina didn't expect to see Roland again. She transferred the money for her legal fees to his account and thought that chapter of her life was closed, but fate had other plans. 2 nights later, Evelina was abruptly awakened by the persistent ringing of her phone. Normally, she set her phone to silent at night, but for some reason she had forgotten to do so. Half asleep, she realized it was her phone and picked it up to see Roland's name on the screen. Hello, she answered groggily. Evelina, call 911 to 231 Willowbrook Lane, apartment 4B, Roland said urgently before the call disconnected. Terrified, Evelina jumped out of bed, pacing her room in a panic. She tried calling Roland back, but he didn't answer. Unsure of what else to do, she decided to call for an ambulance. Hello, 911. A man is in trouble. The address is 231 Willowbrook Lane, apartment 4B, she said, giving the address Roland had mentioned. Your call has been received. The ambulance is on its way, the operator replied. Unable to sleep, Evelina paced back and forth, debating whether to go to Roland herself. She worried about leaving her children alone. What if Ivy or Miles woke up and found her gone? Ultimately, she decided to stay home and wait for morning, a torturous decision. At first light, she got her children ready, dropped Ivy at school and Miles at daycare, and headed to the address Roland had given her. She had never been to his home before and wasn't sure what to expect. Upon arriving, she quickly found apartment 4B and knocked on the door repeatedly, but no one answered. Frustrated, she started banging on the door and calling out, Roland, open the door, please. Her commotion drew the attention of an elderly neighbour who opened her door and asked, What's all the noise, dear? Does Roland live here? Evelina asked desperately. Yes, but he's not home. I heard he was taken away by an ambulance last night, the woman said. Evelina's heart sank. Do you know which hospital? She asked. No, dear, I don't know, the neighbour replied before retreating to her apartment. Evelina stood in the hallway trying to collect her thoughts. She resolved to call every hospital in the area to find Roland, but she didn't need to. Shortly after, her phone rang. Evelina, it's me, Roland's weak voice said. Roland, what happened? I've been so worried, Evelina exclaimed. I went to your apartment, but no one was there. I was beaten in my building's stairwell, Roland explained quietly. One of them was your ex-husband, Graham Whitaker. What? Evelina gasped. That can't be true. Graham would never do something like that. He was with another man I didn't recognize. They ambushed me in the stairwell and beat me badly. While they were attacking me, Graham kept saying, if it weren't for you, I'd still have my job. I tried to fight them off, but there were two of them. They beat me until I couldn't move. I think they thought I was dead. Oh my God, Roland, I'm so sorry this happened to you, Evelina said, her voice filled with guilt. When they left, I managed to pull my phone from my pocket and call you. Your number was still in my recent calls, he explained. Did you report it to the police? She asked. The paramedics did. They're required to report assaults. The police have already questioned me. I told them everything, and they'll probably find Graham soon. Roland had suffered a closed head injury, a bruised shin, and multiple cuts and abrasions, but he was recovering quickly. Evelina visited him in the hospital every day, bringing fresh food and fruit. She was one of his most consistent visitors, though Roland's son stopped by a couple of times. His ex-wife, however, never came, at least as far as Evelina knew. During the months following Roland's discharge from the hospital, Evelina noticed no other women in his life. She had also never seen her ex-husband's new partner, Clara. Over time, Evelina and Roland grew close. They spoke on the phone daily, discussing life, travels, politics, animals, children, and just about everything. Without realizing it, Evelina felt that Roland had become an important person in her life. Roland decided not to withdraw the assault report. He knew Graham would likely face legal consequences and could even go to prison. Does it bother you at all that the father of your children might end up in jail? Roland asked Evelina one day. Or should I withdraw the report? Evelina was silent for a moment before responding. I want to talk to Alexander. We've needed to meet for a while to discuss what to do with the country house. This was true. Evelina had been meaning to meet with Graham but hadn't followed through due to the busyness of her life. Gathering her courage the next day, Evelina called him. Graham, hi, we need to meet, she said. Come to the country house if you can. I'm not working right now and Clara is sick. I've been taking care of the baby, Graham replied. Oh, so the baby's already born? Evelina asked, feigning casual interest. The news was unpleasant, but she knew she had to accept it. Yes, a month ago. I became a father for the third time, Graham said with a hint of melancholy. All right, I'll come, Evelina agreed. I hope you remember the address, Graham teased. Don't worry, I remember, she replied, her tone serious. She quickly packed her things and drove to the place she had once considered her home. Arriving at the house, she was greeted joyfully by Snowflake, their family dog, and the children. Evelina patted Snowflake on the head. How are you, girl? Everything okay? She asked, feeling a pang of nostalgia. Inside, the house seemed different, neglected and less inviting. Her thoughts were interrupted by Alexander, who appeared in the living room holding a tiny baby in his arms. I knew you were coming when Snowflake started whining. She usually barks at everyone except you. She still growls at Clara. Clara's afraid to go near her, Graham said. Is it a boy or a girl? Evelina asked. A boy. His name is Calvin, Graham replied, rocking the baby gently in his arms. Clara's been sick for 2 days with a fever. She refuses to see a doctor, he added in a subdued voice. She's different since the birth, talks about postpartum depression, but won't take care of the baby. I've been helping as much as I can, but she's apathetic and doesn't want to do anything. Evelina understood all too well what he meant. She had experienced something similar after Ivy was born, but a friend had dragged her to a psychiatrist who prescribed medication. Evelina wasn't sure if it was the pills or time that helped her recover, but she knew postpartum depression was serious. Graham, you need to get Clara to a doctor, Evelina said, though she didn't understand why she was helping them after everything they had done to her. Still, she couldn't stand by when a child's well-being was at stake. She refuses all help, Graham said. I know she needs medical treatment, but I can't force her. Call an ambulance now, Evelina urged. If she's had a high fever for 2 days, it could be serious. Graham hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'll call. Meanwhile, Evelina took Calvin from Alexander. The baby initially lay peacefully in her arms, but soon began to cry. She walked around with him, trying to soothe him, but nothing worked. Taking him outside, she found a stroller, placed him in it, and began walking laps around the house. After some time, he finally fell asleep. 15 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. Graham led the paramedics upstairs to Clara, who reluctantly agreed to be taken to the hospital. Graham came back downstairs with a hastily packed bag. "Evelina, I'm going to the hospital with Clara. Can you stay with Calvin until I get back?" he asked. Evelina nodded, realizing she couldn't say no, even though she never imagined she'd one day be babysitting her ex-husband's child from his mistress. Life, she thought, was stranger than fiction. Graham disappeared into the ambulance, leaving Evelina with no chance to respond. She found herself unexpectedly babysitting his child, as Graham and the ambulance were already gone. With no other choice, she began walking around the yard with the stroller to keep the baby calm. About an hour later, the baby woke up crying. Evelina quickly realized he was hungry, but had no idea what to feed him. She carried him inside, found a bassinet in the living room, and gently placed him there before heading to the kitchen. After some searching, she found formula and a bottle, indicating the baby was formula-fed. Carefully reading the instructions, she prepared the bottle, checked the temperature, and returned to the living room. Taking the baby into her arms, she fed him. He eagerly drank every drop, clearly very hungry. When he finished, he looked at her with curious eyes, studying the unfamiliar woman who, for now, had taken the place of his mother. Graham returned 2 hours later, visibly tired. "How's Clara?" Evelina asked, still holding the baby. "She has pneumonia," Graham said, his voice heavy. "The X-ray showed it. I also told the doctor about her depression. He promised to monitor her closely. I'll need to stay home with the baby for the next couple of weeks." "I'm sure you'll manage," Evelina replied, handing him the baby. As Graham reached out to take the child, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, their faces were close. Evelina quickly pulled away, realizing with certainty that she no longer felt anything for her ex-husband. The events of the past months had extinguished any lingering feelings she might have had. "No problem," she said. "If you need help with the baby, let me know. I can come by occasionally." On her way home, Evelina reflected on everything that had happened. Graham called her later to let her know his mother would be coming to help him with the baby. He also mentioned their unresolved issue. "Evelina, about the house. I can't kick you and the kids out, especially since you're renting now and struggling with money. I'll give you half the house's value. Would that work for you?" he asked. "Yes, that sounds fair," Evelina replied after some thought, even though it was difficult to part with the house where she had raised her children. "Great," Graham said. "I'll transfer the money to your account soon." He hesitated before adding, "One more thing. I'd like to apologize publicly to Roland, your lawyer. Do you think you could ask him to withdraw the complaint against me?" Evelina lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. "Graham, do you realize how awful your actions were? You assaulted someone just for telling the truth in court." "Yes," Graham admitted. "I've only now understood how serious this is. If I go to jail, Calvin will grow up without a father." Evelina sighed. "I'll talk to Roland," she said finally. "But don't forget Ivy and Miles. They miss you a lot." As she left, Graham called out, "Bring them by to visit. I'd love to see them." That evening, Evelina called Roland. "Roland, Graham's situation is difficult right now. Clara is in the hospital with postpartum depression and pneumonia. He's out of work. Could you withdraw the complaint, please?" "For you, I will," Roland replied warmly. "Thank you, my dear," Evelina said, the words slipping out unintentionally. They felt like balm to Roland's heart, making him smile. "By the way, did you resolve the house issue with Graham?" Roland asked. "He'll give me half its value. I realized I don't need the house anymore. It's not the same place it used to be. It's someone else's home now, with someone else's child and someone else's life. I wouldn't be able to live there." "I understand," Roland said quietly, feeling reassured by her words. I know a good realtor who can help you find a new place." "That would be wonderful," Evelina replied, grateful for his support. 2 weeks later, the money for the house was deposited into her account, and Evelina began searching for a new home. She dreamed of a spacious, cozy apartment where her children could feel safe and loved, a place to create a new chapter in their lives. Evelina shared her plans to find a new home with Roland, and they started searching together. They viewed numerous apartments, and eventually Evelina shortlisted 3 that fit her requirements. Now she just needed to make a final decision. "Evelina, take another look at the apartments with the kids this time," Roland suggested. She agreed, and on a weekend she visited the 3 apartments with Ivy and Miles. Surprisingly, the children made their choice quickly. "Mom, I love this apartment because my room will have cat-themed wallpaper," Ivy exclaimed. "And I like this one because there's a cool playground nearby," Miles added. "Well, my darlings, it looks like we've made our choice. We'll take this one," Evelina said, delighting the children. 2 weeks later, Evelina became the proud owner of the apartment. She, Ivy, and Miles were thrilled and decided to celebrate their housewarming with family. "Mum, can I invite Roland to our housewarming party?" Ivy asked cautiously. Evelina had grown so accustomed to Roland's presence that she wanted to share this happy occasion with him. "Of course, my dear," Evelina replied, her heart warmed by Ivy's excitement. Roland accepted the invitation and arrived with gifts for the kids. He brought Ivy a smart assistant and Miles a large remote-controlled car. The children were ecstatic and spent most of the evening playing in their rooms, leaving Evelina and Roland alone in the kitchen. As they talked, Evelina suddenly realized how much she had come to love Roland. It was as though the realization had quietly grown in her heart while she was preoccupied with other things. "Roland, why don't you stay with us tonight?" Evelina asked, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Her eyes met his, reflecting both vulnerability and a growing sense of certainty. "I want you to." Roland stepped closer, his arms enveloping her in a warm embrace. "I've been waiting for you to say that for a long time," he admitted, his voice low but filled with relief. "I didn't want to pressure you, knowing everything you've been through, your divorce, the endless legal battles over the property, and raising Ivy and Miles almost single-handedly. It's not easy, but you've handled it all with so much strength. I've always wanted to lighten your burden, to be there for you." Evelina's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked up at him. "I've felt it, Roland," she said softly. "I've felt how much you care, how patient you've been. Thank you for standing by me, for believing in me, even when I wasn't sure of myself. I love you, Roland." "I love you too, Evelina," he replied, his voice almost a whisper, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "You know, I used to think it was impossible to love again so soon after a heartbreak. I used to judge people who said they'd moved on quickly. But now I understand. A year ago, I believed Graham was the only man I'd ever love. I thought our life together was my forever, but I was wrong. What I feel for you is deeper, truer than anything I've ever known." Evelina smiled, her heart full for the first time in what felt like years. "I never thought I'd find love again either, but everything with you feels different, better, real." Roland leaned in, brushing his lips gently against her ear. A shiver ran down her spine, her breath hitching as the moment deepened between them. "Stay with us," she urged again, her tone resolute. He pulled back slightly, searching her face for reassurance. "What about Ivy and Miles?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Will they accept me? I don't want to be just some guy in their lives. I want to be part of their family, a real part." "They adore you," Evelina reassured him. "You've been kind, patient, and fun with them. They already see you as someone they can trust, and I know they'll come to love you as much as I do." The next day, Roland packed his belongings and moved in, renting out his apartment to focus on building a life with Evelina and her children. Evelina continued working remotely, her schedule a delicate balance between her career and her responsibilities at home. Roland, however, quickly took on many of the household tasks and eased the financial pressure on Evelina, allowing her to breathe for the first time in years. Together they built a partnership founded on respect, love, and teamwork. Their evenings were filled with the laughter of Ivy and Miles, who adored the fun activities Roland brought into their lives. Months later, Evelina crossed paths with Graham at a local cafe. She hadn't seen him in over a year, and the sight of him brought a swirl of emotions, nostalgia, pity, and the faintest pang of sadness for what they had lost. He looked thinner, older, and worn down by life's challenges. They exchanged polite greetings, and after some hesitation, Graham gestured to an empty chair at his table. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes searching hers. "I could say the same," Evelina replied. "How have you been?" Graham sighed, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "Not great, to be honest. Clara and I divorced. She took our son and moved away. I can't blame her. I couldn't give her what she needed. I couldn't give anyone what they needed." He paused, his voice faltering. "I heard about you and Roland. I'm glad you found happiness." Evelina nodded, her heart unexpectedly heavy. "I have," she said gently. "Roland's been wonderful to me and the kids. We've built something solid, something I didn't think was possible after everything." Graham leaned back, his expression softening. "You always deserved that, Evelina. I didn't realize it back then, but you deserved so much more than what I gave you." "I appreciate you saying that," Evelina replied, her voice calm but firm. "But Graham, we both made mistakes. We weren't right for each other, and that's okay. What matters now is that we've moved forward." Before they parted ways, Graham mentioned he was planning to leave the city. "There's nothing left for me here," he admitted. "I wanted to offer you the country house before I go. It was always more yours than mine." Evelina smiled faintly and shook her head. "Thank you, Graham, but my home is here now, with Roland and the kids. I've finally found where I belong." As she walked away, Evelina felt an unexpected sense of closure. Graham was a chapter of her life that had ended, and though it had been painful, it had led her to the life she now cherished. In their cozy new home, Evelina, Roland, Ivy, and Miles flourished. The children adored Roland, who became not only a father figure but a true partner in their lives. Roland taught Miles how to fix bikes and helped Ivy with her school projects, while Evelina marvelled at the joy and stability that had entered their lives. On warm evenings, they gathered in the backyard for barbecues, laughter ringing through the air as Roland flipped burgers, and Evelina chased the kids with the garden hose. They began making plans for the future, a family trip to the mountains, a vegetable garden for the backyard, and even adopting a dog. This new chapter wasn't without its challenges, but Evelina and Roland faced them together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. For the first time in years, Evelina felt whole, knowing she had found not only love but a family built on trust, resilience, and hope for the future.